Good morning, student. Today I'm going to tell you about structure of Linux operating system. In previous lecture, we will discuss introduction of a Linux operating system and various types of distributions, families of Linux operating system and practical portion also. So today I'm going to tell you about the uh, structure of Linux operating system. So let's start. Uh, Before start, I will tell you again. I will tell you about what is Linux. So why we tell you again and again, Linux is this, Linux is this, Linux is this, because very important definition. What is Linux? So Linux is an basically open source operating system like other operating systems such as your Microsoft Windows, Apple Mac operating system, iOS, Google Android, etc. Okay. So an operating system is a software that enables the communication between computer hardware and software. Okay. Again, I repeat, an operating system is a software that enables the communication between computer hardware and software. So it conveys input to get processed by the processor and brings output to the hardware to display it. Okay. So this is the basic function of an operating system, although um, it performs many other important tasks. Okay. So let's start. First of all, what is Linux basically? So Linux is an open source operating system like other operating systems such as Microsoft Windows, Apple Mac OS, iOS, Google Android, etc. Okay. So as I told earlier, an operating system is software that enables the communication between computer hardware and software. Okay. So it conveys input. It conveys input to get processed by the processor. So it conveys input to get processed by the processor and brings output to the hardware to display it. Okay. So this is the process of operating system. So this is the basic function of an operating system, although it performs many other important tasks. So let's not talk about. So basically, an operating system is a collection of software, each designed for a specific function. So Linux operating system has following component. So on the screen, this is the very important diagram which is based on various components of a Linux operating system. So before starting, I will tell you about the evolution of Linux operating system. The Linux operating system was developed by Linus Torvalds in 1991. Remember, the Linux operating system was developed by Linus Torvalds in 1991. Okay. So he suggested improvements but was rejected by Unix designers. So he thought of launching an operating system designed in a way that could be modified by its users. So that's why, listen carefully, that's why Linux operating system is open source operating system and you can download from Google. Okay. And you could be modified by and all could be modified by its users. So nowadays Linux is the fastest growing operating system as it is used for from phones to supercomputers by almost all major hardware devices. Okay. So here you see the structure of your operating system, Linux operating system. This is a very important structure of a Linux operating system. Here you see system softwares. These are the components of Linux operating system. Okay. So collection of components to make a Linux operating system first. Okay. So in Linux operating system, first component is your system software. Second is your user process. What is system software? What is system libraries, kernel? I will tell you in next slides. Wait. So what is user utility? What is compilers? So what is system libraries? What is kernel? Kernel modules. What do you mean by hardware? CPU, RAM, input, output. So this is the basic structure diagram of Linux operating system. Okay. First of all, I will tell you about kernel because kernel is a very important part of Linux operating system. You can say it is the core part of the operating system. Okay. Kernel is the core part of the operating system. It's very important part of the operating system. Basically, kernel, you can say it establishes communication between devices and software. Understand? So basically, what kernel do? Kernel, it establishes communication between any devices and any software. So it establishes communication between devices and software. Kernel. So moreover, kernel, it manages system resources also. So moreover, it manages system resources also. So basically it has a we can say four responsibilities. How many responsibilities? Four responsibilities in kernel. Okay. So in kernel, there are four responsibilities, and Linux kernel is the core part of the operating system. So first responsibility of kernel is device management. Which one? Device management. Second is your uh, memory management. Okay. Third is your process management. Fourth is your handling system calls. So these are the four responsibilities of kernel in Linux operating system. Fine. What is device management actually? So you see, kernel, Linux kernel is the core part of the operating system. Fine. It establishes communication between devices and software. Moreover, it manages system resources. It has four responsibilities. Okay. So this is your kernel, and it establishes communication between devices and softwares. Also, it manages system resources. Okay. What is device management actually? Basically, it also, first of all, it manages communication between all the devices. First of all, okay, it manages communication between all the devices. So a system has many devices connected to like CPU, a memory device, sound cards, graphic cards, etc. Okay. A kernel stores all the data related to all the devices in the device driver. Without this, kernel won't be able to control the devices. So basically, kernel stores all the information, all the data related to all the devices, like printer. When you install your printer on your PC, so first of all, you will install device driver first. Okay. So what kernel do? A kernel stores all the data first related to printer device. Okay. So without this kernel, won't be able to control the devices. Okay. So when you give the command or to printer, so a kernel reads all the data, all the information in the device driver and establishes a communication between your hardware to or hardware to software. Okay. So thus kernel knows what a device can do and how to manipulate it to bring out the best performance. So it also manages communication between all the devices. So it also manages communication between all the devices. The kernel has certain rules that have to be followed by all the devices. So this is the basic definition of device management. Okay, in Linux operating system. Fine. So next is your memory management. This is your second responsibility of Linux operating system. So another function that kernel has to manage is the memory management. Another function that kernel has to manage its memory management. So the second duty, you can say, second duty of kernel is memory management. So what is memory management actually? The kernel keeps track of used. The kernel keeps track of used and unused memory and makes sure that processes should not manipulate data of each other using virtual memory addresses. Okay. So the kernel keeps track of used and unused memory and makes sure that processes should not manipulate data of each other using virtual memory addresses. So you can say very secure. So it controls everything. Who? Kernel. Okay. So next is your process management. So in the process management, kernel assigns enough time. Kernel assigns enough time and gives priorities to processes. In the process management, kernel assigns enough time to gives priority to processes before handling CPU to other processes. So it also deals with security and ownership information. So this is basically process management. Okay. So it in the process management, kernel assigns enough time and gives priority to processes before handling CPU to other processes. Okay. So next is your handling system calls. So what is handling system calls basically? Handling system calls means a programmer can write a query or ask the kernel to perform a task. So also it handling the system calls also. So what it mean? Any programmer can write a query or ask the kernel to perform the task. Okay. So next is your system libraries. So what is system libraries? A system libraries are special programs that help in assessing the kernel's features. So system libraries are special programs that helps in assessing the kernel features. So a kernel has to be like a trigger to perform a task, and this triggering is done by the applications. Okay, but application must know how to place a system call because each kernel has a different set of system calls. Okay. Basically, each operating system supports these standards, and then these are transferred to system calls for that operating system. The most well-known system library for Linux is glibc, that is GNUC library. So in your college, there is a library. Okay. So this is the same example of a system library where programmers have developed a standard library for procedure to communicate with the kernel. Okay. So next is your system tools. So what is system tools actually? So basically, Linux operating system has a set of utility tools which are usually simple commands. Linux operating system has a set of utility tools which are usually simply commands. When you write commands on your terminal, like yesterday, I will tell like cal command, like sudo command, sudo su. So what is sudo su? Switch user do. Okay. So Linux operating system has a set of utility tools which are usually simple commands. It is a software which GNU project has written and publish under their open source license so that the software is freely available to everyone. That's why. For example, if you download source code of Linux operating system from Google, you can just type your command to modify your own operating system and use. So that's why it's freely available to everyone. So this is your open source license. So with the help of commands, you can access your files, you can edit your files, you can manipulate your data in your directories also with the help of different types of commands. You can change your operating system as per our requirement. Okay. Or you can change the location of files or anything. So this is all about your system tools basically. So what is end user tool basically? End user tools, these end tools make a system unique for a user. So end tools are not required for the operating system but are necessary for a user. So end tools are not required for the operating system but are necessary for a user. So basically end user tools for a user, not for an operating system. Okay. So some examples of end tools are graphic design tools. Okay. Your office suites, your browsers, multimedia players, etc. So basically these end tools make a system unique for a user, and end tools are not required for the operating system but are necessary for a user. Okay. So next is your development tools. What do you mean by development tools? With the above three components, your operating system is running and working. Your operating system is running and working, but to update your system, you have additional tools and libraries. Okay. So these additional tools and libraries are written by the programmers and are called tool chain. What it called? Tool chain. So a tool chain is a vital development tool used by the developer to produce a working applications. Okay, working applications. So this is all about your development tools, system and user tool, system tools, system libraries, memory management, process management, handling system calls, device management, kernel part. So this is a very important diagram here. You see, uh, this is also very important. This is the architecture of a Linux system consists of the following layers like your hardware layer. This is your hardware layer. This is your kernel layer. This is your shell layer. And this is your utility layer. This is your utility layer. So in hardware layer, hardware consists of all peripheral devices like your RAM, your hard disk, and your CPU, etc. So in your kernel layer, it is the core component of operating system, interacts directly with the hardware. It is the core component of operating system, interacts directly with the hardware. So provides low level services to layer components. So kernel provides low level services to upper layer components like shell, like utilities. Okay. So what is shell layer? Basically, what is shell? An interface to kernel. This is interface to kernel, hiding complexity of kernel's functions from user. Understand? I repeat, an interface to kernel, hiding complexity of kernel's functions from user. So basically, in shell, takes commands from user, takes command from user and executes kernel functions and executes kernel functions. Okay. So, so these are your utilities like your applications, compilers, date, cat, editors. So what do you mean by utilities actually? So utility, it's your utility programs that provide the user most of the functionalities of an operating system. Okay. So utility programs that provide the user, that provides a user most of the functionality of an operating system. Fine. So this is all about your kernel, device management, memory management, process management, handling system calls. Okay. Your system libraries also. Okay. System tools, end user tools, development tools. Okay. Development tools. So now I'm going to tell you about uh, how does Linux work. So in this lecture, I'm going to tell you how does Linux work actually. Okay. So here you see what is Linux and basically how does Linux work in this structure. So Linux is a Unix-like operating system, first of all. Okay. So Linux is a Unix-like operating system, but it supports a range of hardware devices from phones to your supercomputers. Okay. So every Linux based operating system has the has the Linux kernel. So and a set of softwares, your system softwares, packages to manage hardware resources. Okay, basically, how does Linux work actually? So every Linux based operating system has the Linux kernel and set of softwares, also packages you can say, and manage hardware resources. Also, in this diagram, Linux operating system includes some core GNU tools to provide a way to manage the kernel resources, install software, configure the security settings and performance, and many more. So all these tools are packaged and together to make a functional operating system. Understand? So Linux operating system includes some core GNU tools to provide a way to manage the kernel sources. So on your side, question arise how to use the Linux, how to use Linux, sir. So we can use Linux through an interactive user interface as well as from the terminal command line interface, as I told earlier. So different distributions have a slightly different user interface, but almost all the you can say commands will have the same behavior for all the distributions. Okay. So to run Linux from the terminal, you can just right click on your desktop and open terminal. This is your first um, step, and if you press Control plus Alt plus T from your keyboard, terminal will be open. Third is your menu. Click on your left side. You just open terminal. So to explore, sanitize keep on of your desktop. Fine. So the structure of Linux operating system. So a lot of advantages of Linux operating system. Question arise always better than operating system. Always. Yes, I call from a student. Linux is better or operating. So why is Linux better operating system? So there are many features of the operating system. Listen carefully. There are many features. So basically, many features of the Linux operating system that better operating system. However, in some perspective, other operating system can be more useful than Linux. Uh, uh, lot of advantages available that it's Windows operating because in Linux operating system there are very powerful advantages as compared to if we compared with the Windows operating system. The advantages of Linux is very powerful. First is your very powerful advantage is open source. You can just anyone can customize the operating system and you can use them and you modify your code. You can distribute your code for any purpose. This is very, 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 very big advantage. Open source. You can easily download your source code from internet. Second, your why Linux is better than Windows operating system. You can say security purpose. Security. So the Linux security feature is the main reason that is the most favorable option for developers. It's not completely safe, but it less vulnerable than others. Okay, I'm not tell you about it's completely safe, but it's most of the time it's a safe. But each application needs to authorize by the admin user. So for examples, any student download any application from internet, but uh, it needs to be authorized by the admin user while installing, while updating, while deleting. Okay, so the virus is not executed until the administrator provides the access password. But When you type the password and you give permission to install the application, the virus is entered in your Linux operating system. But in the case of a Windows operating system, antivirus is compulsory, or you can that's Linux is powerful and safe. Very light. So Linux is lightweight. So what is lightweight? Running Linux are much than others. Operating system. Requirement for running much, you can say, uh, big than other operating. The memory generally makes a distribution as it is 28 of in the case of Linux, it's not 20 in G. That's why this is your stability of Linux. So Linux is more stable than other operating system, and do not require to reboot the system to maintain performance levels. But in the case of Windows operating system, it need to require to the system. Understand? That's why stability is the operating system. Disadvantage your performance as compared to Linux system provides a performance. Over different like handling. In the case of operating system, if you can use like your user versus different networks. Another you can say uh, flexibility. So this is very flexible. It can be used server applications too. So it also is option for space computers. Okay. So when you update your software, so software update is your advantage. So in Linux, the software update are in user control, and we can select the required updates. So there are large number of updates. So these updates are much faster than other operating system. Okay. Next is your you can say distributed as earlier available in the market, like families for Linux operating system. So it provides various options and flavors of Linux to the user. We can choose any distros according to your need. So some popular distributions of operating system like your Ubuntu, like your Debian, like your Linux Mint, your Arch Linux, and Ubuntu, Red Hat. So these are the families of your basically for the beginners. Ubuntu and Fedora would be good choices for programmer. My favorite operating system is Ubuntu. So next is your user interface. So it's a based operating system, but it provides an interactive user interface like Windows. Okay. So there are a lot of advantages. Your privacy, your networking, installation, multiple desktop environment, multitasking, multiple environment. So for this system. So this is how your structural system and develop your Linux and the structure of Linux and your kernel in detail. What is the actual Linux operating system, and your device management, what is the actual role of device management in Linux operating system, process handling system libraries in your Linux operating system tools, why it's to users and user tools, why it's important for users also. Some examples of and tools are graphic, office, suits, browser, media, tools. So thank that's your operating system much. Thank you.